A reset in the violet heart of the Ophiuchus Nebula, a sprawling web of silver spires and translucent bridges held together by the gravity of a dying white dwarf. Here the air tasted of ozone and ancient parchment, and the light never truly faded into night. It merely shifted from a pale lavender to a bruised, deep indigo. Elara moved through the great observatory with the practiced silence of a ghost. As a celestial librarian, her duty was to catalog the stars, but more importantly, to manage the empathy scales, the massive brass mechanisms that monitored the emotional output of the city's 3 million inhabitants. The readings are cold today. Elara had been thinking them here for years. Unable self and all BM, pain wands with a nation's Hermasian, province consistence. Are performing a routine inventory. She stopped at a shelf labeled, Authorized Affection, Sector 4. She reached out and took a vial, the glass warm against her palm. Inside, a swirl of crimson mist danced like a trapped bird. When she held it to her ear, she could hear it, a faint rhythmic sound like a heartbeat, or perhaps a name whispered in the dark. This was a sigh, a moment of forbidden connection that the state had deemed dangerous. To Elara, it was the only thing in the city that felt real. I couldn't let them destroy them, she whispered. They are beautiful, even the ones that hurt. The late fall into the vault. They call it logic, Elara. They call it peace. But it is a graveyard. The Felguard is a beautiful corpse drifting in the dark. We were meant to burn, not to simmer. He looked at the rows upon rows of vials. How many thousands are there? How many lives have been hollowed out to keep the scales balanced? Too many, Elara admitted. Her voice barely audible. She looked down at the vial in her hand. I am tired of living in a world of muted colors. I want the red back. I want the gold. I want to know what it's like to love someone so much that the stars seem small. Release the method had to bypass the central resonance chamber, located at the very peak of the High Court, a floating structure that hovered above the city like a predatory bird. The court was guarded by the sentinels, clockwork constructs that were programmed to detect any emotional fluctuation. To reach it, they would have to navigate the clockwork constellations, a series of rotating gears and platforms that served as the city's navigational heart. We'll need to move through the service tunnels, Julian whispered as they left the vault. I led her through the pand. I take any the story and fashion eyeballs. So the first time Elara felt the collective empathy of the city not as a burden, but as a connection. She felt his fear, his hope in a growing shimmering heat that she realized was directed at her Benny change. The sentinels don't monitor the lower levels. They think we're too broken to try anything from down here. Helve's ears, some the size of cathedrals, turned with a slow, grinding majesty. Each gear represented a star system, and their alignment the city's path through the nebula. To cross them, they had to jump from one moving tooth to another, timed to the rhythm of the celestial clock. Stay close to me, Julian cautioned. The gravity here is unstable. If you miss a step, you'll drift out into the nebula, and there's no coming back from that. It was a surreal landscape, a forest of metal and develis, from Zir Cranley, at the same Tragacket man, tied to the names from the Doctus and Devase. The contents have the container from Eniros. Recessant in his voice was a flat, synthesized drone. Your emotional signatures are outside the permitted range. You are experiencing agitation and unsanctioned proximity. Stand still for immediate stay to Caskins from the vans for mood mean and serious caustically, and just course of gone challengendery. The impregent to maniac becap civilities at a task, sharing justicery's urgulation. The scowl of the malfunctioning sentinel fading behind them. The High Court loomed ahead, a spire of white marble that seemed to pierce the very roof of the nebula. They entered through a ventilation shaft, emerging into a hallway lined with statues of the city's founders. The air here was thin and cold, smelling of ozone and high-altitude ice. The resonance chamber is at the top of the central tower. Julian whispered, his face pale with exhaustion. But the peacekeepers will be everywhere now. They'll have detected the sentinel's distress signal. Peacekeepers everywhere now. They'll have detected the sentinel's distress signal. Deep keepers will be everywhere now. They'll have detected the sentinel's distress signal. They per sentinel gave field it was made at Cascos. If people take this keepers in the prevalent today, then my name estrangtion called him in Freeman distraction. It was another chambers of the paper in the face of war meld into blibbery. The world is not frozen, Alara. It is stable. Without the scales, we would tear each other apart. Human emotion is a volatile fuel. It burns bright, yes, but it leaves nothing but ash. We have chosen the long, steady glow of reason. He signaled to the peacekeepers. Apprehend them, and bring me the satchel. The stolen size must be neutralized immediately. The kind the memory of a first kiss. The wave hit the K-by-hours, sudden-till districts. People who had been sitting in silent, orderly rows suddenly gasped. A woman cooking a tasteless meal burst into tears as the memory of her mother's spice garden flooded back to her. A man working at a terminal suddenly remembered the girl he had loved in the lower districts, and he stood up, his heart pounding with a forgotten urgency. In the high court, the peacekeepers dropped their pikes, clutching their chests as they were overwhelmed by a sudden crushing sense of guilt and empathy. Master Kalen fell to his jammers that wind his band. Master Kalen fell to his knees, his glass robe shattering as he began to sob, the weight of centuries of the Sicaria. The gravity tethers were snapping, which was now sparking with chaotic energy. Alara's fingers flew over the controls, but the traditional commands were useless. The city was no longer a machine. It was a living, breathing entity, fueled by the collective passion of its people. "Julian, the words," Alara cried. "The poem you wrote about the sun. Speak it." Julian looked at her confused. The dying white dwarf at the center of the nebula flared with a sudden, renewed brilliance, as if acknowledging the return of the light. It became a traveler, a nomadic star city drifting through the deep reaches of the Ophiuchus Nebula. The high court was converted into a great hall of music, and the vaults where the stolen sighs were once kept were open to the public, becoming a museum of human experience where anyone would remember what it felt like to be human. Alara leaned her head on his shoulder, her silver fingers intertwined with his. "Never," she said. The quiet was a lie. This is the truth. Below them, the city was a riot of light and sound. People were dancing in the streets, their laughter rising up like sparks from a